Good morning, everyone. Today is episode 7, and we're going to be talking about one that I feel is really, really important, which is the father wound. When the first man in your life teaches you what love is, the father wound isn't just about having an absent father. It's not just about abuse. It's not just about abandonment. The father wound is about what happens when the person who is supposed to help you feel safe becomes the source of your pain. It's about what happens when the first man in your life teaches you lessons about love, trust, worthiness, protection, and relationships that you spent years trying to unlearn. And whether your father was physically present, emotionally absent, abusive, controlling, neglectful, or simply unable to give what he never received himself, the impact can follow you long into adulthood. Today's episode is about the father wound. Welcome back to Unbound and Rewritten with Laura. Today's conversation is one that can be difficult, not because it's about blaming fathers, not because it's about staying stuck in the past, not because it's about telling the truth. But because it's about telling the truth. The truth about how our earliest relationships shape us, the truth about the wounds we carry, and the truth about what healing actually requires. For many years, I didn't fully understand how much my relationship with my father had impacted my life, just because at an early age, like I keep repeating, is that I was born with discernment and wisdom. And so I had the conscious knowledge of the explanation of what was happening and what was going on. So to me, for many, many, many years, I thought that was the healing. I thought I had moved on. I thought I had accepted it. But healing has a way of revealing the places that still need our attention. The father wound is the emotional pain that develops when a father is unable or unwilling to provide the safety, love, protection, validation, guidance, or emotional presence a child needs. Sometimes it's caused by abuse. Sometimes it's caused by abandonment. Sometimes it's caused by neglect. Sometimes it's caused by emotional unavailability. And sometimes it's caused by fathers who are carrying their own unhealed wounds. The father wound isn't always about what happened. Sometimes it's about what never happened. The conversations, the support, the protection, the encouragement, the conversations, the unconditional love. The child who never received those things often grows up searching for them in other people, places, and things. When I was returned to my father's care at 10 years old, part of me hoped things would be different. Part of me hoped I would finally feel safe. Part of me hoped I would finally experience the love and protection every child deserves. But instead, I found myself once again living in survival mode. So right before I turned 11, my mom had passed. So at that point, it was only him moving forward. So by 11 years old, I was experiencing physical and emotional abuse. On top of that, I wasn't given the freedom to be a child. I was expected to carry responsibilities that weren't ever mine to carry. I became responsible for helping care for siblings and managing adult responsibilities long before I was emotionally ready. And while the abuse itself caused pain, there was another wound underneath it. The wound of not feeling protected, the wound of not feeling chosen, the wound of realizing that the person who was supposed to keep me safe wasn't able to. The father wound doesn't stay in childhood. It often follows us into adulthood. It can show up as difficulty trusting others, fear of abandonment, seeking validation from others, struggling with self-worth, people-pleasing, choosing unhealthy relationships, feeling responsible for everyone else's needs, fear of authority figures, difficulty receiving love, hyper-independence. For many survivors, hyper-independence becomes a badge of honor. That's strength. You're strong. So proud of you. But often it's a trauma response. Because somewhere along the way we learned, if I can't depend on others, I'll depend on myself, which is a story I told myself at 5 years old. One of the hardest realizations in my healing journey was recognizing how often I was still looking for someone to save me. Not consciously, but emotionally. The little girl inside me was still looking for protection. Still looking for safety. Still looking for someone to choose her. And because those wounds weren't healed, they often influenced my relationships, my decisions, and how I saw myself. Healing required me to recognize that. Not to shame myself, not to blame myself, but to understand myself. So I'm going to get real deep, vulnerable, and honest right now. And I know I shared this a while back, but a year ago, as of this month, I moved to South Carolina, a spiritual move. And I knew I wasn't supposed to bring my younger daughter, who's now 19, with me, because this journey was about choosing myself. But as a mom, and your kid has nowhere to live, given the place that she was at, they were moving out, like, what am I supposed to do? I'm not going to let her be homeless. So, of course, I went and drove home back to Michigan and got her. But after a month of her being here, she started acting weird and wandering around at the middle of the night. And my child is extremely introverted and has very bad anxiety. She would never do something like that. On top of it, she doesn't know anybody here. I don't know anybody here. I don't know, maybe it was another month down the road after that, or 2, I found some Coke in her room that I flushed down the toilet. She's never touched hardcore drugs before. I mean, she's been dealing with anxiety, bipolar disorder, depression, cutting herself, self-worth issues, borderline personality disorder. All of these things are stemming from trauma. I've been dealing with it for, since she was in 4th grade with all this, and just never could find the right therapy treatment, the right therapist, the right anything. Unfortunately, nobody was equipped. And even still to this day, especially since COVID, there just hasn't been anybody equipped to help her, unfortunately. And given that she's a highly sensitive empath, which I know has a lot to do with her struggling to deal with how she's feeling and managing her emotions, and probably not telling the whole story of everything that's happened to her because it's not adding up. But one thing I know for a fact is this father wound. Now, her father was amazing when she was born, in the sense, not to me, but to her, in the sense that he wasn't an authority figure. He was more of like a friend who just would get on the floor and play with her. And that was fine. That's really important, when you're a kid, to be nurtured in that way. So, and I protected her because later on, I discovered that he got into drugs, and it ended up ultimately going from pills to heroin. Again, my role of fixing, saving, rescuing came into play, which I healed and have learned from that relationship to not do anymore when it comes to drug addiction. And it's not being mean. It's just because by doing those things, you're actually enabling them to continue to go deeper into their addiction, because you're actually making them comfortable. It took a long, long time to understand that, but with God's help and revelations and renewing my mind and so on, I was able to get through that. So circling back around to my child who has severe father wounds, I'm going to assume, because I'm not her, that it's just because of the lack of being in her life, given that he's still in drug addiction, and ultimately he now is doing meth, and he has moved to Arizona. So he's still not doing well, and he's fully aware of what's going on with her because we've had some people reach out to him, but he has not responded, which there's no words for that, honestly. I mean, as a father, you would think that that would wake your ass up for a moment and not be selfish in what's going on with you, but to help your child, given that he was part of this whole thing. But either way, what I had discovered, I don't know, 5 months later, ultimately, was that my daughter had met a 30-year-old man who came into the gas station where she worked, offered her drugs, and the story begins. He would go and hang out with her at work because she wasn't going anywhere but working home. And then ultimately, he continued to invite her to a lake house an hour away from where I'm living, 2 hours with traffic when it's heavy. And so, yeah, she's hooked on meth now. And truly in her heart believes that this man is protecting her and providing for her. But yet she hasn't been eating in the last 6 weeks. It's a very sad story, and it's very difficult for me. And sometimes I still can't believe it's happening in my life. I would never have thought this would be an outcome, but here we are. But the only thing that I can do is continue to let go and let God, because every time I go down that dark rabbit hole, I get sick and I'm not eating, I'm not sleeping, I can't function. And I just don't wish this on anybody, unfortunately. But that would be another example of somebody going off the deep end, filling voids from a father wound. And honestly, after talking to so many people who've been on meth, the only ones that recover from something like that is an extreme spiritual experience. But I'm going to stay hopeful and pray that eventually she'll come out of this, wake up. I truly believe, given that I know that she's a highly sensitive empath, that this is part of her journey and her growth, but without the dark, you'll never know what your purpose was or how to help other people if you haven't been through it yourself. And so I choose to hold on to hope and that God's got her right now, because somebody, after sharing this with them, told me something important that I didn't think in a moment of confusion. Yes, God told me not to bring her here. This may be why. But also, God knew I was going to do it anyways. So if that is true, this was going to happen either way. So healing the father wound isn't about pretending the pain didn't happen. It's not about excusing harmful behavior. It's not about minimizing your experience. It's about acknowledging the wound, grieving what was lost, grieving what never existed, and learning how to stop seeking externally what can only be healed internally. For me, healing meant learning that my worth was never dependent on someone's ability to see me. My value was never determined by how I was treated. My identity was never defined by what I lacked. Healing meant learning that I could give myself the validation I spent years seeking from others. Maybe your father was absent. Maybe he was abusive. Maybe he was emotionally unavailable. Maybe he was physically present but emotionally distant. Maybe he did the best he could. And maybe he didn't. Whatever your story is, your experience matters. Your pain matters. And acknowledging the wound doesn't make you ungrateful. It makes you honest. Healing begins with honesty. One of the greatest lessons I've learned is this: we can't heal what we're unwilling to acknowledge. The goal isn't to stay angry forever. The goal isn't to stay stuck. The goal is freedom. The goal is understanding. The goal is healing. And healing begins when we're willing to tell the truth about what happened and how it affected us. The father wound may have shaped part of your story, but it does not get to define the rest of it. You are not what happened to you. You are not what was missing. You are not what someone failed to give you. You are worthy. You are valuable, and your healing matters. Thank you for joining me for episode 7 of Unbound and Rewritten with Laura. If this episode resonated with you, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who may need to hear it. And honestly, I would be grateful in so many ways. You know, the Me Too thing, when you feel like you're just in the trenches alone and nobody else has been through this. And of course, I know there's people out there that have. But what a blessing when other people can share their stories with Me Too's as well. I would love to hear about others who have been able to beat the addiction of meth. I know that it's laced with fentanyl, heroin, something else, because my daughter was acting normal when she was on it. She wasn't talking fast. I mean, her eyes were dilated, but she wasn't cleaning. She wasn't doing any of the things that an upper drug makes you do. So she was definitely on some downer that was balancing her out. I would love to hear what those may have been. I would love to hear some stories of people that were in addiction of meth and were able to recover, and how many years that they're clean. And I would also love to hear mom stories of their daughters, whether it was from a father wound or not, of is there good that eventually comes out of this? Are there other mothers out there that share the same story that I do, but are on the other side and they've healed? I'd be so grateful to hear other stories. And remember, you were never meant to stay bound, and I will see you in the next episode.